It was cloudy that morning, and Sandra's husband, Jonathan, had gone out to complete the roofing of the house he was working on the previous day. Even before he started the work, he had already collected all the money for his payment to buy food for his family and pay his children's elementary school fees. As he left the house, the cloud was darker, and despite Sandra's advice to wait a little while, Jonathan left because he wanted to finish the job on time and get another one to be able to buy food for his family. Just a few minutes after he climbed the roof and started working, the heavy rain started. As he placed the ladder and wanted to come down, he slipped off the roof, fell, and hit his head on a big stone nearby. That was the end of him. Jonathan was gone, leaving his wife, Sandra, with their 3 young children, a boy and twin girls. When the rain was too much, Sandra was restless. She couldn't continue with her cooking and silently prayed to God to protect her husband, unaware that Jonathan was dead, lying helpless in the mud and beaten by the thunderous rain. A few minutes after the rain stopped, Sandra's worst fear happened. Her husband was taken back home, bloodied, cold, and breathless. She screamed, rejecting what she was seeing, but it was her reality. A widow at 20 with 3 children, no business, no hope, and no one to come to her aid. After her husband's burial, Sandra sat all night, not crying anymore, but deeply thinking of where to start from. Looking at her 3 young, innocent children, who were still not aware of the calamity that had befallen them. Sandra chose to be strong for her children, to live the life she so much desired for them. She chose to be a strong woman and sacrificed the life she would have lived for them to have a future. She reminded herself that the future of her children is her future. If they succeeded, she had succeeded as a mother. The children had been at home since the last year Jonathan died because Sandra could not pay their school fee. That morning, she concluded to sell the only 2 lands Jonathan had in the village and her wrappers. She believed if her children succeeded, they would build her the latest mansion of their time and buy the wrappers she wanted. But their education mattered most now, and not her comfort or land. Sandra prayed silently to God to make her decision the best choice and guide the children, and then called the land agent in the village. The agent, Mr. Clement, was a friend to her late husband and known for his uprightness. As they went to the land, Clement quickly told Sandra that the 2 lands are top priorities of the international NGO that recently came to the village and wanted to have a permanent office to carry out their activities. The following day, Clement came with a white man, wearing a black suit, whom he introduced as George Wood, a representative of the NGO. Sandra couldn't contain her joy when Clement told her they were ready to buy the 2 lands for the sum of 20 million naira. She wanted to shout and roll on the floor, praising her God, but she held herself because of the stranger standing with them. Sandra refused to bargain further for fear of losing the NGO, even when Mr. Clement told her the NGO representative wanted to know if she was okay with the price. She just told them to go ahead and make the payment. In the next few hours, Sandra handed over the land documents to them after making the payment. Mr. Clement refused to collect anything from Sandra despite her persistence to appreciate what he did for them, but he simply said he did it to appreciate his own friend, Jonathan, who had always supported him. Sandra had already sold her wrappers before the land was sold, but instead of buying new ones, she continued to use the few old ones remaining and refused to take anything from the money for her personal use. She understands the journey ahead would be tough, and rather chooses to be prudent with how she spends the money. The following day, she enrolled her children in school again and started frying playing chips in front of their house to raise money that would be used to purchase food and other household items. After a few years, the first child, George, graduated as the best student in his class, and his twin sisters, Ellie and Eliana, also graduated from high school as the best students in their classes. Sandra cried the day her children returned home, one hurt, and broke the news. The twin girls sat by their mother's side and simply told her to guess what had happened. "I don't have the strength for this. You girls should talk to me. Where is your brother? Where is my George?" she asked, almost crying. Then they broke the news. "Mama, George has been given admission to study medicine and surgery. He will become a medical doctor when he graduates." Then George came inside with a wide smile and embraced his mother. Sandra couldn't hold back her tears. Then George started, "Mama, this is not all. Ellie and Eliana had also been given admission to study law. They will become lawyers when they graduate. Mama, you will have a medical doctor to attend to you and lawyers to sue whoever messes up with you," he said, laughing. Sandra simply went on her knees, crying and appreciating God for not failing her, for not allowing the people to mock her after the death of her husband, Jonathan. Her children joined her in the praise and worship. The days that followed, Sandra and her children were busy preparing for the school resumption. It would be the first time her children would be traveling out of the village, and the first they would be separated from their mother. Every night, she would call the children to the living room, advising them on the danger of associating with bad friends in school. She would list names of people in the village who were sent to the university by their parents, but could not graduate. "Remember, you don't have a father. Remember how we suffered to get here. Let your education be your first priority. Remember, I had to sell your father's lands and my wrappers to pay your school fees. The remaining money is what I would be using to take care of your school expenses and your upkeep. Please, I beg all of you, do not fail me. You must promise my sufferings are not going to be in vain. And remember, we don't have anything to call our own again. If you, George, Ellie, and Eliana fail, we all fail. And if we can't pay this house rent, we will end up on the street. And God forbid." They all knelt down in front of their mother, held her hands, and promised to be the best students, graduate, and come back to change her life and repay her for all the sacrifices she had made for them. But before they went to bed, tragedy struck. Armed robbers broke into their house, pointed guns at Sandra and her children, and asked her to bring out the money. "Which money? I am a widow suffering to train my children to go to school. Please have mercy. We don't have any money." "Woman, better do the needful before we shoot you. Are you saying Uncle Ahmadi is lying against you? How can you sell his brother's land for millions and refuse to give him his own share for 5 years?" This was when it became clear to Sandra and her children that Uncle Ahmadi, the elder brother of their late father Jonathan, never gave up after he had previously tried to sell the land before Sandra eventually sold it to train her children. And Mehdi had visited and threatened several times, demanding 50% of the money, but Sandra maintained her stand that it was for her children's education. The armed robbers said they were lenient enough and collected 10 million naira from the remaining 15 million naira, which Sandra had hoped would be enough to train her children in the university. As the armed robbers left with the money instead of crying, Sandra told her children to be strong and promised it wouldn't affect their education. "This is not a time to cry. Crying makes you weak before your enemies who want to see us down, but we will be strong. I will work harder on my business, and I promise you, all will not suffer because of this." But Sandra knew it was going to be tough, but she was prepared for this and ready to fulfill her promise to her children. In the morning, as George and his twin sister carried their bags and were ready to leave for school, it was an emotional moment for them. Sandra and her children couldn't stop crying. She understood they needed to leave for school for them to achieve their goals, but she also imagined how she would cope without them. She had never lived alone since the death of her husband, but she would start now. She bid them farewell. "Mama, we will make you proud. You will be proud of us," George said. Ellie and Eliana could only cry as they continued to wave at their mother till they were out of sight. George and his siblings quickly adapted to the university environment after their registration. After their classes, they were always together in the school library to the point that the librarian knew them as consistent students who always came to the library to study and do research on their courses. They knew the shelves containing every book in their discipline and studied so hard as if their existence depended on it. Back at home, their mother, Sandra, had learned to live alone, at least for now. She expanded her plantain chips business, employed more hands, and with the help of a community teacher, got her product labeled and approved by the food agency. She supplied 2 big malls and shops and didn't need to depend on the sales she made in the store alone. These steps helped her to make more money and never, not once, complain any time her children called her for money. But this does not come without paying more sacrifice. She spent more time working with the people she employed, jumping motorcycles to deliver the orders she was getting. She became a shadow of herself, looking older than her age, and each wrinkle on her face is a representation of what she had passed through as she committed herself to giving the life she never had to her children. At the university, the release of the first semester examination announced George and his twin sister to the school management and their fellow students. George had the best result in his level, while her twin sisters also maintained the same feat. The school management was amazed. They'd never seen anything of the sort from siblings. The school's highest CGPA was 5.0. George and his twin sisters wrote 5.0, setting a new record in the school. It didn't happen by accident. It was what they had worked for. And whenever they remembered their mother's advice and where they were coming from, the urge was always there to do more, and they've started exactly the way they wanted it. Despite the praise and the fame they now enjoyed, they weren't too comfortable with what they had gotten. They continued to study even harder because they knew there was much work to do to maintain what they had started. During the holidays, they returned home, but instead of being happy seeing their mother, it was uncontrollable tears that were flowing freely from their eyes as they embraced their mother. They are not just crying because they missed their mother. They cried seeing their mother's present appearance, how she had lost her beautiful caramel skin and long hair and suddenly become older because of the stress and too much work to meet up with their academic expenses. Throughout the holiday period, they helped their mother in her business, and Sandra had enough time to rest as her twin daughters did the delivery while George helped those frying the chips and the packaging. 3 weeks later, they returned to school again. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon. The sun was hot, but George didn't feel it. He had just finished his anatomy class, and as usual, he was rushing to meet Ellie and Eliana at the library. His bag was full of books, and his mind was busy thinking about the new assignments he had to complete. As he entered a quiet corner near the science building, something felt strange. It was too quiet. Before George could even react, 4 rough-looking boys jumped out from behind the walls. "Hey, Mr. Perfect," one of them shouted, blocking George's way. George's heart skipped. He recognized them. Boys from his faculty, who had always looked at him with hatred because he was always praised, always on top. "So it's only who is brilliant, Abby," another said, stepping closer. "You keep disgracing us for this school. Today is today." George tried to stay calm. "Please, I don't want trouble," he said, backing away. But they didn't listen. One of them suddenly grabbed his shirt and another punched him hard in the stomach. George fell to the ground, clutching his books. They kicked him, cursed him, and told him he thought he was better than everybody else. As George struggled to defend himself, one of them pulled out a sharp bottle, smashed it, and aimed it at his face. George tried to block it, but the broken glass sliced across his right cheek, leaving a deep, bloody scar. Hearing footsteps approaching, the boys panicked and ran off. A kind lecturer coming out from his office rushed to George's side and helped him up. Blood was dripping from his face, and pain was burning deep inside him. Not just from the wound, but from the betrayal from fellow students like him. Ellie and Eliana arrived shortly after, screaming when they saw him. They ran to him, crying, asking what happened, but George just shook his head. "No, don't tell Mama," George said firmly as they helped him to the school clinic. "If Mama hears, she will break down. She will leave everything and come here." The nurse cleaned the wound, stitched the deep cut, and gave him medications. As they sat by his hospital bed, Ellie and Eliana held his hands. "We won't tell Mama. We'll stay strong together," Ellie whispered. The scar remained. It healed, but it never disappeared. Every time George looked at himself in the mirror, it reminded him that even when you shine, some people will hate you. But you must not give up. When they returned home during the holiday, it was the first thing their mother saw. "What? George, what happened to you?" He smiled gently and told her he had an accident in school, but chose not to tell her and make her worry. "He's okay now." Sandra was still worried until Ellie and Eliana convinced her that their brother was okay. A few years later, the day finally arrived. The convocation ceremony at their university was grand. Families came from all over the country to celebrate. Proud parents wore bright clothes, taking pictures with their children. Sandra, wearing her old but neat wrapper and blouse, sat quietly at the back of the large hall. She had insisted she didn't want to disturb her children. She wanted to sit quietly and watch them shine. The Vice-Chancellor walked to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we celebrate excellence," he said loudly. He raised a special golden plaque. "For the first time in our university's history," he continued, "3 siblings have emerged as the overall best students of the year." Everyone clapped and cheered. "Please welcome George Jonathan, Ellie Jonathan, and Eliana Jonathan to the stage." The whole hall exploded with applause. George, Ellie, and Eliana walked proudly to the stage, their academic gowns flowing. Sandra couldn't hold her tears anymore. She cried loudly, attracting people around her who were wondering why the woman at the back was sobbing so much. The Vice-Chancellor continued, "Because of their excellence and their extraordinary perseverance despite great hardships, our prestigious sponsors, the multinational oil company, have decided to offer them automatic employment." The hall exploded again. George was offered a job immediately as a medical doctor at Global Energy's hospital division. Ellie and Eliana were both offered employment as legal advisors in the company's legal department. Sandra stood up, holding her chest, crying, laughing, and crying again. Some parents walked up to her and hugged her, even though they didn't know her. It was clear she was their mother. God had not failed her. She had been mocked. She had been called foolish for selling her land and wrappers, but today she was the mother of champions. As the sun was setting that evening, the 3 of them, George, Ellie, and Eliana, took their mother's hand and led her quietly outside the university gates. They traveled home with smiles on their faces, knowing their dreams had come true. After a few years of working for the oil company, George, Ellie, and Eliana came home unannounced to surprise their mother, who rushed outside to welcome them home. In the evening, when the sun set, they held their mother's hand and said, "Mama, we are grateful for all you have done for us," George said with a smile. "We made a promise." Sandra looked confused. "What, my children?" Eliana winked at her sister. "You'll see, Mama." Then a brand new car pulled up in front of them. It was a shiny black SUV with a big red ribbon tied across the bonnet. "For you, Mama," George said, handing her the keys. Sandra gasped, covering her mouth. She looked at the car, looked at her children, and burst into fresh tears. "But that's not all, Mama," Ellie said. "Please, enter the car. Let's take you somewhere," Eliana added, laughing. Still crying and shaking, Sandra climbed into the car, with her children sitting proudly around her. They drove through the town, then onto a newly tarred road she had never seen before. They pulled up at a massive white mansion with gold-plated gates and green lawns. George came down and opened the gate. "Welcome home, Mama." Sandra almost fainted. A big signboard in front of the mansion read, "Sandra's Paradise." They led her inside. The house was huge, shining with marble floors, tall glass windows, gold chandeliers, and a wide living room bigger than their entire former house. In the center of the living room were dozens of boxes filled with new wrappers, Ankara fabrics, lace materials, Italian shoes, and designer handbags. George knelt down. Ellie and Eliana knelt too. "Mama, these are for you," George said with tears. "Thank you for selling your wrappers and land for us. Now we will cover you in the finest wrappers forever." Sandra collapsed into their arms, crying like a baby. She couldn't believe her eyes. She couldn't believe her life had changed so much. It was more than she ever prayed for. And yet, the best was still to come. As Sandra sat inside the beautiful mansion, she touched everything around her like a child seeing magic for the first time. The shining floors, the new sofas, the big golden curtains. Everything felt like a dream. Her heart was beating fast with joy. Ellie and Eliana ran upstairs and came back with a beautiful wrapper made of pure lace and a sparkling gold necklace. They gently wrapped the lace around their mother's shoulders and placed the necklace around her neck. "Mama," Ellie whispered, "you are now a queen. This house is your palace." Sandra held her chest and looked up to heaven, tears rolling down her cheeks. "God, is this really me?" she cried. "Is this really happening to me?" She remembered the nights she slept hungry, the days she sold her wrappers, the humiliation, the loneliness, the robbery, the sacrifices. And now, here she was, in a palace built by her own children. Her heart was full. A few days later, George, Ellie, and Eliana organized a grand housewarming party in honor of their mother. Everyone in the village heard about it. People who once mocked Sandra for selling her land and wrappers now came dressed in their best clothes, trying to get a glimpse of the miracle. Even Uncle Ahmadi, the wicked uncle who had once sent robbers to her house, came in shame, hiding at the back of the crowd. The children had invited pastors, community leaders, and friends. There was plenty of food, music, dancing, and laughter. At the height of the party, George stepped forward, took the microphone, and called for silence. Everyone became quiet. He cleared his throat, looking at his mother, who sat on a golden chair specially prepared for her. With a strong voice full of emotions, George began. "Today, we celebrate not just the opening of this house, but the strength, the love, and the sacrifices of our mother, Sandra Jonathan." He paused, holding back tears. She gave up everything, her comfort, her land, her wrappers, her peace, just to see us educated. She suffered so we could have a better life. The crowd clapped loudly. George continued, "Today we tell the whole world that no sacrifice of love ever goes unnoticed by God. Mama, this house is just the beginning. From today you will eat the fruit of your labor with joy." The crowd shouted, "Amen!" Sandra couldn't stop crying. Her children came to her, knelt down before her again, and handed her a brand new scripture and a printed copy of all her advice to them, a symbol of the foundation of their success. "Mama," George said, "your prayers were not in vain." From that day, Sandra's life changed completely. She had drivers to take her wherever she wanted to go. She had housekeepers to take care of the home. She had all the clothes, wrappers, shoes, and jewelry she could ever dream of. She was respected, honored, and loved by everyone. Whenever George had time off work from the oil company's hospital, he would fly home just to check on her. Ellie and Eliana, now respected lawyers in the multinational oil company, would send her gifts from all over the world. Gold from Dubai, clothes from Paris, and perfumes from Italy. The same woman who once fried planting chips by the roadside was now traveling to cities for vacations, attending charity events as a guest of honor, and sponsoring the education of other poor widows' children. Sandra didn't just become rich, she became a blessing to others. One evening, as Sandra sat outside on the mansion's balcony, watching the sunset with a cup of tea in her hand, George came and sat beside her. He looked at her lovingly and said, "Mama, do you remember the day you sold your wrappers?" Sandra smiled, nodding slowly. "I remember, my son. I didn't know what the future held, but I trusted God." George held her hand gently. "You gave up wrappers to build our future," he said. "Now we will cover you with riches and honor for the rest of your life." Sandra laughed softly, tears shining in her eyes. "My children, my jewels," she whispered. "May God bless you beyond what you can ever imagine." But little did Sandra know, another surprise was still coming. George, Ellie, and Eliana had been secretly planning an even greater gift for their mother. A surprise that would not just honor her, but leave the entire nation talking. If you enjoyed this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel to be notified when we post the part 2.